Being a writer, you experience everything twice and you observe everything twice. I have to be pregnant with a poem in order to deliver the poem. What is the source of this unhappiness? Because if someone looks at your life, observes your life from the outside, you have everything. Pyaar is a stage. And Ishq is the destination. If I'm not happy, if I'm not content, if I don't like who I am, I can be the best man on the planet and I will still not be happy with him or happy for him. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever received is don't let anyone else tell your story.
Priya Malik is a poet. She's a storyteller. She's someone who, through her thoughts and what she puts out there, makes you think about yourself, your relationships, and how you perceive all of them working together. She's my guest today on Take a Pause. But before we go there, make sure you hit subscribe and smash that bell icon. Go straight to my chat, Priya Malik. I always think about what my first question needs to be, and I saw something which you said, and you said you're an observational poet. I want to ask you about: have you always been an observer of people and things around you?
I have, to a very large degree, and that also includes observing myself. I don't know if this is going to make sense, but when I'm in a situation of any interest or crisis, I also tend to be observing myself. And at the same time, I'm the doer and the observer. And I've had quite a few experiences of this nature. And I think being a writer, you tend to be that person because you experience everything twice and you observe everything twice. So this could be us conversing and I could go back home and write about what I have observed today. So it's an important part of any art form, as you rightly had said.
It's interesting. Is that something you worked on to build? Because, it's something which is told to you, right? Is that you need to be able to look at yourself from the outside and really understand what makes you tick, how you function in a certain way. It seems a lot easier said than done, because when you kind of go into it, the one thing we tend to fool a lot more is ourselves. We tend to fool ourselves a lot more than other people do because we tell ourselves certain things and stuff like that. So was this something you built over time?
I think with me, it's very innate. I think I've been like that since I was a child. I don't know about you, but my first memory, I can describe my kindergarten day. I was 5 years old. And I have a photographic memory as well. So it is in such detail that I know the color of the benches. I remember my Kittu ma'am, who was the kindergarten teacher. I remember it was my first day at school. I remember the color of my bag. I know where my dad exactly dropped me, how much I cried, what happened after that. I think it's been there for a very long time. Over the years, I've become more forgetful with age. But back in my 20s, my memories was like I could paint them. Although I can't paint, but I could.
I don't think I remember too much from that period. For me, it's always been specific moments that have stuck with me for certain reasons.
Right.
But I still don't think it's photographic for me. I think for me, it's a lot more like you have a vague recollection of what you felt like and maybe what happened.
Yeah, I'm very visual as well. And I think, again, it helps me with my poetry because imagery is such a great part of poetry writing, right? If you can paint that picture with your words. So I think somewhere my entire life has conspired to make all this happen. But even my dreams, I remember my dreams very well. I can paint them. I remember the colors. Visually, I know things. Yeah.
It's interesting you say dreams. I was reading something and it said that if you actually wake up from your sleep and immediately pick up a pad and start writing what you dreamt about, and you make that an innate practice, it's a great way to tap into your subconscious, because sometimes you really have the most interesting ideas and thoughts right before you go to bed.
Yes.
Or midway through a dream.
Yeah.
Do you do that?
My favorite topic. So Freud, when he started doing dream analysis back in Freud and Jung, all of these people, when dream analysis became a thing, they talked about this. They said that if you have had a nightmare or, if there's a dream that, you kind of remember, you wake up and you write about it, and you will be able to you'll start seeing a pattern,
Yeah.
and you'll start recognizing symbols that you often dream about. Obviously, there's a lot of conjecture about it. The whole idea of dream analysis is flawed, so to speak. But a lot of my punchlines from my poems, lines which have become famous, have sometimes come to me in that REM state where I'm half asleep, half not asleep. And I tend to make a note of it on my WhatsApp.
Yeah.
I type it to myself.
Yeah.
I have a WhatsApp group with myself. So I do that. And I think people are right. In your dreams, there are a lot of revelations that come in dreams.
Yeah, because you're not spending as much time really focusing on something, or you don't actually have to do anything when you're at sleep. So
Yeah,
I guess it just kind of opens it all up.
Yeah, and I think subconsciously you have been thinking about those things in some way or the other, right? Sometimes you will see the most random person in your dream and you'll wake up and be like, why did I see this person? And it's so weird because you're trying to understand, because you probably haven't even focused on that person per se. But somewhere in your subconscious mind, that person sticks there and appears in your dream. So I've had a few of those as well. I've stopped giving it as much importance, but you tend to start making patterns in your head. Yeah.
And it's interesting we've tapped into dreams because
right away.
And because I was actually having another conversation. This is interesting. The fact that I read that yesterday about dreams, and a couple of days ago I was talking to a friend, and we were both talking about our most recurring dreams, because we all have that one dream that wakes us up.
Yes.
Right? For me, it's always falling off a building. That's
a very common recurring
and like at
dream
impact is when I wake up.
Yes.
And he was telling me that people have many psychological perspectives on it, but it's actually what you eat before you go to bed that defines it. So if you have a sugar rush, or if it's some food that makes you kind of get that,
spike,
it's like your body waking you up by saying, you had too much of this. And I'm like, damn, what did I eat whenever I've fallen off?
Yeah, science ruins everything.
But getting back to dreams and creativity and observing, what's your process like? How do you take something that's, let's say, comes to you in your dream, comes to you when you're observing things around you? How do you take that and translate it into what you...
So I have this thing wherein I tell people that I have to be pregnant with a poem in order to deliver the poem. And it's very true in my case. I have to be thinking about that piece in some way. I've observed something in my life or some other person's life, sometimes over years. And that has been marinating in my head for a while. And then there will come a point wherein I know that it is ready to come out. So that's kind of the metaphor that I always use to describe my process, because that is generally my process, which is why commissioned writing becomes a little bit of a task for me sometimes, because I have to impregnate myself with the brand's idea and then work backwards. But I think in my case, yes, it is a lot of marination of the idea and gestation period, whatever you want to call it, and then it comes out within a minute or two. So I don't spend a lot of time on the actual draft. Like, I know when I open my laptop to write, I know it will take me only a couple of minutes. But the pre-process sometimes can take hours, depending on if there is a deadline, months, and in some case, years. I started writing my book 4 years ago for Harper, and it's a fiction book. Fiction doesn't come to me very easily. And I have changed who I was compared to the Priya who started it 4 years ago is not the Priya who's sitting in front of you today. So I'm finding it very hard to finish the book because it's not marinating in my head. So, yeah.
The whole point of marination is something we don't talk about enough in the creative process, right? There's one entire school of thought saying, got to sit on the, at the table every day, right? That's the only way it'll come to you. And there's also this whole point of just go for a walk, find something that inspires you, find something which kind of triggers that.
Yeah, go to the mountains.
And in many cases, if it's observational, you got to go to places where you actually observing.
Very busy places, yes. Like I write the best, even when it comes to me on my laptop. Either if I'm in the house and there's a lot of noise around me, everyday noises around me, I can write in cafes, I can write in restaurants, I can write in busy settings. It doesn't matter to me. Like, it doesn't have to be a quiet space for me.
So does it have to be a space that I know inspiration is a broad term, but you need to find a spot which inspires you, or is it more about curiosity that you say, okay, I want to go to a space where I know that some part of my curiosity will get like.
For my marination bit, for the process, yes. I need to be curious. I need to be experiencing things, observing things. But for the actual process, I can be anywhere with my laptop and I can produce it. Yeah, yeah. The baby can be birthed anywhere.
You write and you perform your poetry in a way which I've always felt that resonates. It has certain impact to it, right? In just the way you enunciate and the way it flows. Was that also? I always ask everyone saying, what is natural and what is something you worked on? Which aspect of this did you have to work on a lot more?
Sure. So I write to a beat in my head. In fact, I did a poetry collaboration with another poet a couple of months ago. And I had the idea in my head. I just hadn't put it down on paper, which means it had been marinating. I had just not typed it out. And the entire poetry circuit laughs at me because of this, because I sent him a voice note and I said, okay, listen, this is the idea and this is how you have to write. Ta 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 ta. And I was like literally enunciating it like that. I was pretty much telling him how the poem will be recited. And he laughed. He was like, oh my God, I can't believe you sent me this. And he actually wrote to that beat that I had in my mind. And then we were all laughing about it one day. And I realized that I do have a beat in my head when I write. So it's not something that I put a lot of thought in. It's just that when I have an idea, the beat also is somewhere with me, which is why I always perform with music, which is why music is such an integral part of who I am as a poet. I find it very hard to just do poetry without either me adding the the beat to it, or someone else doing it for me. Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, it does.
Okay.
And have you always, even when you're younger, and I always like to get to childhood.
Yes.
Were you someone who, be outspoken in your craft, put it out there, get on stage, get onto that mic?
Yes. Oh my God, I was such a crazy kid. So people would come to my house for dinner. And this is, again, a very clear memory. I remember I used to get on top of the coffee table and I used to start reciting poetry. I've done that when I was probably 6-7 years old. And initially, parents have to tell you, ki beta, uncle ko poem sunao. Here, this kid was sunawing her poems to uncle anyway, without uncle even wanting to listen to it. There were times when her parents had to send me back to my room. Ki, okay, beta, ho gaya. And I was be like, nahi, aap ek aur suno, Incy Wincy Spider. So I was a very dramatic kid. I definitely enjoyed being the center of attention. And my teachers lapped onto it very early on as well. So then I started doing a lot of debates and elocutions. And, I think my first time competing on with a microphone in my hand was probably when I was 8 or 9 years old. So it started off early and it paid off in the end. Although I detoured in the middle, but oh well, that's another story.
So I was like that as a kid, but in a very different way.
Yeah.
I would change costumes and I would come and like just jump, dance or perform or play different songs and
cool.
To anybody who came home.
Yeah.
and I grew up, I would say till my maybe till my 9th, 10th grade,
Yes.
I was that kid.
Yeah.
And then I left the town I grew up in and moved to the city.
Got you.
And everything just kind of crashed down, like all form of I think confidence got switched up to self-doubt and suddenly went to the background and so for me it was that, and it took me years to kind of get back to now to some form of doing this.
Same. So I was a performer. I was always on stage, always did these things till I was 18. And then for 10 years, I did not get back up on stage at all. So I took a 10-year hiatus completely. And the best way to explain it is that life happened to me. I was too busy living and, making ends meet and doing things. I left the country. I was just, there was so much happening around me. And then after 10 years, when I went back up on stage, I was like, oh my God, I've missed this. I was suddenly that Priya that used to really enjoy and revel being on stage. And rest is history. I decided to leave everything and just get stage as my main thing. Yeah.
During that period, did you also go through moments of, did you think back on why am I not on stage? Did you have, or were there different things driving life?
No, there were different things driving me. I was studying, so I was doing. I have a bunch of degrees, so I was busy studying, and I was applying for my PR in Australia, the whole immigrant life, which I can talk about it in such great detail because I hate it. I hate the idea of displacement and trying to make another country my home because it didn't. It just I never felt at home. I was there for almost 10 years. But I think, yes, I had stopped thinking about it. I was too busy doing other things. And then one fine day, I remember I was really depressed. And this was 2014 or 15, I think. And I was looking up YouTube and I saw button poetry. And I saw this person recite this poem. To me, I did not even know what spoken word poetry was, right? Because it was such a nascent thing back in the day. And with full passion, and it moved me, it stirred me. I was behind a screen and I had goosebumps. And it was OCD by Neil Hilborn. And I was like, oh man, I can do this. And that's where the first poem took place because I had been writing poetry since I was 12.
Yeah.
I just did not know there's an art form wherein you can take it on stage and put your heart and soul into it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that was the only time I felt, why haven't I done this? Like, what have I been doing?
Yeah.
Why haven't I missed stage?
Yeah.
And that was the only moment I remember.
I love the fact that you said that life happened because, I sometimes meet someone in their early 20s and they're like, there's so much happening. I don't want to miss the bus, or I don't want to not be able to do this. And I'm like, I said, I'm 40 and I literally realized I could be a creator and to create stuff when I was 36.
Yes.
And you never really miss the bus. I guess you're marinating, to use your term, marinating that whole point. And at some point it comes to you. At some point, I guess life tells you that, okay, maybe at this point of time, you are ready to kind of showcase what you can actually do.
Yes, absolutely. I was in my late 20s. I was 28 when I decided to give poetry a chance. And at that time as well, I kept my teaching. I was a school teacher. I kept my teaching job on the side. So this was still supposed to be a side hustle. It's only in the last 4 or 5 years that I gave up everything else. And I was like, okay, this is me. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And it happened to be that way. But you can redefine yourselves at any time. I tell people that too. And there's this memory I have. I was at a career counseling session at the school where I used to teach. And the student walks up to me and she was like, oh, Miss Malik, I'm 17 and I still don't know what I want to do in my life. I was like, okay, I'm 27 and I still don't know what I'm doing with my life. And I was sitting there in a career counseling session as her teacher who was supposed to know everything.
Yeah.
But clearly I did not. I was as confused as the 17-year-old Melissa. And I often meet people who are in their 40s. And, I'm in my late 30s now. I meet people who are in their 40s and 50s who are still trying to redefine themselves. And they have as well successfully. So I don't think it's ever too late to find what truly drives you.
Don't you also think that it's human to keep finding ways to define yourself? Because if you figured it out, then you're static, and I think that's more scary than not figuring out what you are doing.
Yes, you've heard that, right? That forget adventure, routine is lethal.
Yeah.
And I think there are a few people who believe in that. I personally think that the only way I can feel alive is if I'm growing every day, I'm learning every day, and I am asking questions to myself every day. The day I wake up without learning anything, without growing in terms of the learning is what makes me grow, and without questioning myself, I think I'll be dead. And I have been dead for all those years, right? I remember those years, my first few years in Australia, wherein I was not growing. And when I say growing, I'm pretty much talking about learning. To me, learning is growth. The more I learn, the more alive it makes me feel. And the day I stop learning, whether it is as a human or as a poet, as a woman, as a wife, whatever roles I might be playing in my life, I think that's the day I would lose the will to live. Yeah.
Asking questions of yourself, like you said,
Yeah.
that's always a tough one, right? Because it's very easy for all of us to give ourselves a free pass, saying, I don't want to ask you because I don't want to touch something that's uncomfortable for me, because we all know what's uncomfortable for us. We
Yes.
stay away from it, and it then becomes even tougher to say, okay, this is something I really need to ask myself. How does someone bring themselves to that point of asking themselves the questions they need to ask?
The hard
Yeah.
questions. I think it is so important to be honest to our own selves. And the reason I say it is because I was dishonest to myself for a very long time in my life. I feel I was living in denial. I feel I was making myself believe in the life that I was leading and in the person who I was becoming. But I think there came a point where I could not recognize who I had become, what I wanted, and who I was being internally. That's not the Priya that I remembered growing up. And I think there has to be a process wherein that moment of self-hatred, self-doubt, self-critique, whatever phrase you want to give it, that comes to you when you need to start questioning yourselves. And if that is happening to anybody, I think that is the right moment. And it comes to all of us. Sometimes we choose to let go and not ask us the hard questions, because the truth is very hard to face. And I've personally come across that as well. And I think that I started asking myself, why are you unhappy? Because I would wake up every day, I would go to my job, I would come home, I would have a great meal, I would go to the restaurants on the weekends, I would hang out with my friends, I would live a lovely life with my ex-husband, and I would still not be happy. And this happened daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. Years passed by. And there came a time when I started asking myself, why are you unhappy? What is the source of this unhappiness? Because if someone looks at your life, observes your life from the outside, you have everything. What is it, Priya, that you don't have? And the answer was that I wasn't creating anything. The answer was that I wasn't producing things that I thought I would produce in my life. It's like being fully pregnant and not giving birth. So obviously you will be in labor pains. So I think it was those 8 years of extended labor. And the day I started answering the questions, I was also very homesick. I wanted to come back home to India. I had had enough of that NRI lifestyle. I realized that it wasn't meant for me in the first 2 years of being there, but I still gave it so many more years, just trying to convince myself that this is it. This is what you wanted. This is going to make you happy. So I think the day I started asking myself why I was unhappy is the day I was truly able to work on my happiness.
Another aspect of happiness, right? I mean, there's been an entire study on this. I think it's one of the oldest studies on happiness, which is the Harvard study, said that the fundamental core of happiness is having those people connected to you who you have relationships with. Having strong relationships, enduring relationships is the core of happiness. You write a lot about happiness and relationships and all the dynamics that kind of come into it. And I remember watching one of your poems, and you speak about the difference between Pyaar and Ishq. And I've watched that a few times, but I want you to explain it. What's the difference between Pyaar and Ishq?
Okay, great. So Pyaar is a stage of Ishq. So when we talk about the Sufi concept of Ishq, you've seen those whirling dervishes that go around in their white robes and they're roaming around. So they believe in the concept of Sufi Ishq. And when we talk about Sufi Ishq, there are 7 stages of Sufi Ishq. Love, which is Pyaar, Mohabbat, is one of the stages. Do you want me to tell you what the 7 stages are?
Yes.
Okay. So the first stage is Dilkashi, attraction. Second stage is Uns, infatuation. Third stage is Aqidat, trust. You start trusting the person. You're attracted to them. You're infatuated. You start telling them about your hopes, dreams, desires, insecurities, fears. Then comes Pyaar. So it is one of the stages that you cross when you are completing your journey of Ishq. Then you come to the next stage, which is Ibadat, which is worship. Then you come to the 6th stage, which is Junoon, passion, madness. You can't live without this person. They become a very integral part of who you are, of your being. And then comes Maut, which is Maut of your ego.
Yeah.
That means you don't think about everything as meh, everything is hum.
Yeah.
That's ishq, when you reach that stage of being one with your lover. In Sufism, it is about being one with your creator. But in terms of Sufi ishq, which is what I believe in, it is about being one with your lover as well. So for me, Pyaar is a stage and ishq is the destination. So a lot of people think I diss Pyaar, and a lot of people think it is as simple as Pyaar Hindi hai, ishq Urdu hai.
Yeah.
But it is not as simple as that in my head. You know, as a creator, I can take that creative license and make something of it. And the Sufi concept of ishq is a very old concept of ishq. I'm not the one to have made it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I asked you that because one of the things I've seen people struggle with the most,
Yeah.
especially considering we're so connected in today's world,
Yeah.
is just building relationships, building friendships, building some form of human connection. Because,
Yeah.
I say this often, we're more connected than we've ever been, but we're actually more disconnected
True.
in so many ways.
Yeah.
From what you observe, how do you look at the place love and relationships are in today, and which parts of those are almost like marinating right now in your head?
Right. So something very interesting that you spoke about was the Harvard study of happiness,
Yeah.
which talks about how your happiness is because of the relationships that you surround yourselves with. I agree, but I also disagree. I don't think I define my happiness by my relationships. I think for me, I can only be in a happy relationship if I'm happy with the person that I am. And I know it is cliche, but I also know that there is a lot of truth in it. If I'm not happy, if I'm not content, if I don't like who I am, I don't think I can be the best man on the planet. And I will still not be happy with him or happy for him.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the disconnect is. So I think love is definitely essential in life. And to me, it has always been a very integral, a very innate, trying to find the perfect word for it, intense need since I was a little girl. You know, I first fell in love when I was 12 years old. And at that point, your parents and your teachers convince you that it is infatuation. I think that's the first time we come across the word infatuation.
Yeah.
Because they all are trying to convince you that it is
Yeah.
not love. But to me, that is the purest form of love there is. Because, it is love.
Yeah.
It is a form of love. It is, one of the stages,
Yeah.
so to speak. And since then, I knew that this is a need that needs to be fulfilled in my life. And it needs to be fulfilled in such a way wherein it consumes who I am, my being. But later on in life, I have realized that that need for love, that need for acceptance that I was looking for in other people was actually, again, a very internal thing for me. I needed to love myself. I needed to accept myself.
Yeah.
I needed to fall head over heels intensely, consumably in love with who I was as a person in order to love others and be truly loved by them.
I forget who said this, but there's this whole point of you can't ask somebody else to fill a hole.
Yes.
I think it was. Did it say in your heart, but within you, which you can't fill yourself?
That's a great
And-
way of saying it. Yes.
And I feel it. That's an important thing to think about, because you're not expecting the other person
yeah.
to make you feel whole, and that also sets like
So
expectations.
much responsibility on
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
You are making other people responsible for your happiness. That is so wrong and so unfair
Yeah.
on them, because they are suddenly walking around with all this weight on their shoulders that, oh my God, I need to make Priya happy. But Priya needs to make Priya happy.
Yeah.
And that's how the circle starts
Yeah.
and it sustains. But you learn it later in
Yeah.
life.
Have you had even from an audience come up to you and ask you something after watching you on stage, which made you really think about, which gave you perspective or a different perspective on what you had just performed?
I've never had someone come and question or give me an insight on what I performed. It's usually appreciation and acknowledgement and everything else. But I remember recently I was performing in Mumbai at the NCPA, and I had a girl who walked up to me, took a picture, and then said, you know, back in the day, you dressed very differently, and now you dress very elegantly. And you know, I wonder what happened, what created that change. And you know, you had your piercings and your tattoos, and you had all of that, the sass, and then what happened? And I remember I told her that I was a very angry person back in the day, and I used to try to channelize that anger externally in everything in life, whether it was the way I dressed or the way I tweeted or the way I spoke or my poetry. And I said the anger subsided, and I'm much calmer at my center now. And you probably see that change reflecting in the clothing as well. I know it's a very innocent question from the audience, but I think the audience was trying to understand
The arc.
the external arc of that as well. So yeah, that's the only thing that made me chuckle. Otherwise,
It's also a great insight in terms of just like, you know, as you evolve, there's so many aspects of you that evolve,
change,
right? If everything from how you are in relationships to how you, you know, just present yourself to how you speak.
yes.
How much of that do you believe is also, you know, it's about how you see yourself? One is how you feel, but the other is how you see yourself.
So I do believe external projection is a real thing. And having been through it myself, I believe in it, but it cannot be true for everyone. I understand that as well. Um, I think you do start projecting who you are in a lot of external ways, whether it is your clothing, your hairstyle, the way we talk to people, the tonality of voice that we use. So I think, yes, it is true. There is a lot of externalization of who we are internally. Had you told me this a few years ago, I would have debated you to no end, because the first time someone pointed it out to me, I was like, no, what do you mean? Like, you know, no, I'm not like, just because I have tattoos and piercings doesn't mean that I'm going through something. And now when I look back at it, I realized that in my case, again, not stereotyping everyone here, but I think in my case, I was going through a lot of anger and grief. And I was trying to externalize it in every way possible. I don't know, maybe waiting for someone to point it out to me or waiting for someone else to see it so that I can see it. So I think it was just this whole cycle that I was a part of. But then again, in saying that, not everyone looks at external appearances in the same way and experiences things the same way. So
It's also interesting, that is that I feel anyone who's an artist who's working to channel everything that they see, everything that they experience into an art form,
yeah.
has a way to kind of let it kind of flow out of them. I feel there's a large number of people who, I mean, I think everybody can be an artist. It's just that people either choose not to practice it or they choose to practice it. Do you feel your art form in many ways helps you understand yourself, understand relationships that you have with friends and in general, and it actually helps enhance who you become?
Yes, I think it is also the other way around. Um, I do believe that my poetry tends to make me think as well at times, especially when I am writing or when I just get off the stage or when I'm watching it back on YouTube. You know, the observational poet in me sometimes comes alive, and I look at myself performing some bits, and I feel that they do change me in long term. And the reason I say this is because a lot of my poems have now stayed with me over the last few years. The way I sometimes used to perform them a few years ago has changed to the way I perform them now, because the feeling and the person and the evolution has taken place. I've even changed a lot of phrasing of some of my poems when I do my live shows. Some of the phrasing has changed because I have changed from the person who wrote it a couple of years ago.
Do you consciously think about how you've changed and almost like, because for me, I do that when I journal.
Okay.
I sit and kind of say, okay, I try to almost put down on paper, this is how I used to react to things, this is how I'm reacting to them now. Um, how I want to kind of keep almost like stamping into my own mind the fact that this is progress, no matter what choice I make, but also not forget the journey that I've kind of been on. So that's been my process. Which is I'm curious to know, do you have a process of reflecting?
I do believe that my past has made me who I am today. So I do give a lot of importance to my past. Do I completely like everything about my past, like everything else, everyone else? No. There are so many things I look back and I'm like, why did I do that? Or, why did I react this way? Or
Yeah.
what was I thinking? But yes, there is. So I've always wrestled with understanding myself. Even when I was a little girl, I used to question who I am at all times. And that questioning and that constant process of asking questions to myself, to others, trying to make sense of my identity, trying to make sense of the world around me, trying to make sense of who I wanted to become when I grow up, what I wanted to become when I grow up. All of these questions have plagued me growing up. And even when other people thought I was a grown up, I was still plagued by a lot of these questions. So I think with me, reflection, critical reflection has always been a part of it. And I think it will always play a part in my life as well. Like, I'm currently in a very happy stage of my life. I'm content with my personal life. I'm content with my professional life. But at the same time, I'm constantly reflecting on it and trying to make myself better. Yeah, that process, I think, is never ending in my case. Yes.
Do you have something you do to reflect? Is there like I mentioned, journaling for me?
Journaling. No, I don't. A lot of people
It's all-
think, yes, a lot of people think that I'm the kind of person who would definitely be
Yeah.
into journal writing.
Because my assumption is
I
a
look
poet.
it. But I don't. No, I don't do that. I don't keep a diary. I write in my Gmail. Have I ever mentioned that? So all my poems are drafts in my Gmail inbox.
Okay.
So I would compose a mail and I would write the poem. Sometimes I complete it, sometimes it's a draft, but everything is in my Gmail. But do I ever indulge in free flow writing or journaling or putting down my thoughts which are not related to poetry or storytelling? I don't. With me, it's always in my mind, yes. I'm calm as a duck on the surface and paddling like a devil underneath, yes.
You also said somewhere that while you don't like the term, you always felt like you were a bit of a misfit.
Yes.
You said you don't like the term, which I agree. I don't like the term either.
It has such a negative connotation to it. I think being a misfit is great.
Yeah. But has fitting in been something which you ever really said, I need to fit in? Was that ever?
Not really. I always enjoyed being a little bit weird as a kid as well. Like, I was a very intelligent kid growing up. I was like, when I say intelligent, I'm saying academically. I was academically always at the top of my class. At the same time, I also kind of knew that I was a little different. I was growing at a different rate than a lot of my other classmates. I started reading at a very young age. I was reading Sidney Sheldon when I was 9 or 10. I shouldn't have been, but I was. And I think books had opened a whole new world, which I felt was just mine. Because none of my classmates or none of my cousins, or my parents would know what I'm reading and, what knowledge I'm seeking and where it is going. I read a lot of nonfiction at a very young age as well. So I think I never really desperately tried to be a part of mainstream or, the other kids at school. But somewhere a lot of them wanted to kind of tag along with me because I was good at academics, so I could kind of help them around with their notes and classes and stuff like that. I've never had a large group of friends either. In fact, friendship is a very has had a very strange place in my life always. I've always had very few friends growing up, and I think it is only the last couple of years that I've learned how to truly make friends, and that has changed the game.
Yeah. What have you learned about friendship?
Oh my God, that I have to let go of the pretense, that I can just be in front of my friends.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a small example. A couple of years ago, if a friend wanted to drop by, I would have a mini panic attack. I would want to make sure that my house is spotless, everything is in place, everything from what I'm cooking to the way the rug is, everything. Because I would be so paranoid about what will they think when they enter my home.
Yeah.
And now I'm at a point, and this is such a superficial example, I know. Now I'm at a point wherein a friend calls me and says, "Hey, I'm in your area, I want to drop by." I'm like, "Come." And even if things are all over the place, I have learned that it is okay. They are my friends.
Yeah.
They are supposed to be okay with this. They're not my guests. They're not someone who's going to go back home and judge me. Oh my God, the rug wasn't in the perfect 90-degree angle at Priya's house. So I think is that also I have become more comfortable with my own self, and I think that has reflected in my friendships. I would never open up to my friends. All my childhood friends and my teenage friends would all be based on some amount of secrets that we would hold for each other. And then I had boyfriends at a very early age as well, so that had a love angle. Then that's not friendship per se.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, I think I've made friends with men, women, people of the LGBTQI community. So I think because I'm friends with myself, I've become friends with others. And it has been beautiful.
Yeah.
I have such lovely friends at this point in my life, which a few years ago I could not have counted on. Yeah.
It's also about trust, right?
Yes.
And I feel at some point we're a lot more open and we're a lot more relaxed about this stuff when you genuinely have, and you feel like it's a safe space and you feel like you can trust. I think it also happens as you get older that you realize there's a core set you can trust and have that form of a relationship with. But when you're younger, the worry is just judgment and everything else.
Absolutely. And, especially when you are one of those overthinking kids, you're constantly thinking about, what are they thinking of me? Do they really want to be my friend? That whole idea as well. But yes, as you grow older, you tend to start looking at your friends as a comfort space or as a safe space rather than as a place of judgment or competition or rivalry. I think growing up in a joint family for me, I would constantly be compared to my cousins. My cousins would constantly be compared to me. Then, my best friend's parents would compare her to me. My parents would compare me to my best friend. So I think growing up, the idea of competitiveness was also so big in my head, because I was always an overachieving kid, that it never allowed me to truly make friends. I feel I was constantly competing with them in terms of academics, in terms of personal lives, in terms of what we have, what we don't have, in terms of looks. Sad to say it, but in terms of physical attributes growing up, when they kind of measure your height and your weight and everything else that they do, I think that allowed me to not make friends truly. And I think I'm at that point in life where the only person I'm in competition with is myself. I'm not competing with anyone else. And I've learned to accept my journey and respect other people's as well. And maybe that's why the doors of this beautiful emotion called friendship has opened up for me. And I'm very grateful for that.
You mentioned overthinking. Are you an overthinker?
Oh, big time. I am constantly thinking that we are talking right now. There's a certain part in my brain which is still thinking and observing and doing its job. Yes, I sometimes want to not think, but I'm just not that person. But I've made a career out of it, so it's fine.
I like to compare my mind to a really crowded central railway station at most times, because there's always so much kind of going on. Interestingly, only when I do this podcast do I feel like I'm not thinking about anything else.
That's great.
At most times for me, it's like there's a lot kind of going on. And a while back, I had a guest on, and she'd written a book for overthinkers called Get Out of My Head. And she said something. She said, overthinking is actually a superpower, which we often think of only from a negative sense, because if you're overthinking, in many cases, you're also guarding yourself. You're also thinking of all the opportunities. As long as you know at which point that goes from being a superpower to being, something that pushes you down. I'm still half and half about that as a concept, but What do you think?
You mean what do I overthink?
What do you overthink, and what do you think overthinking is a superpower?
It can be if you channelize it in the right way. You know, if I'm overthinking and I'm making use of all that extra thinking that I'm doing, then I think it is okay. And in my case, I do as well, right?
Yeah.
I overthink love, I overthink relationships, I overthink my own experiences, other people's experiences, and I create poetry out of it or stories out of it.
Yeah.
So in my case, yes, definitely that works. But I feel that the same way about a lot of things that we look at negatively. And I know I've spoken briefly about this in the past, but anger, I think, is one of those emotions that we always tend to look at negatively. But I think the moment, and anger requires so much energy out of us human beings,
Yeah.
right? The years when I was a very angry soul, I think I built up so much creative energy inside myself that the moment I started channelizing that anger towards creation, it really had a great impact on me.
Yeah.
So I think that way about overthinking, about insecurities, about anger, about jealousy, anything that you tend to attach a negative connotation to. I think there is a lot of positive stuff right underneath the surface
Yeah.
that you can explore in life. Yeah.
Because there's so much intensity to all those emotions, right? All the
Yes.
ones you spoke, there's a genuine intensity to it. So, all you need to do is just kind of like refocus that energy towards it,
Yes.
and maybe just sit with it. So, I've actually realized that sitting with your emotions, especially when they're really intense, helps you channel them more better than to react to them instantly.
Yeah.
Um,
What's that one emotion that you find the most negative in your life that you want to get rid of? Or not get rid of, but look at it positively.
So, I'm actually a person with a really short temper,
Okay.
but it's been years of me just like, so initially it was like no reaction,
Okay.
which kind of made it something
Which is
which
the worst
which
reaction.
is like bottled it in,
The
and
silent, angry people are the
yeah,
worst.
a silent angry person walk away till at some point in time they know that it's that pressure cooker which at some point is going to burst. But in recent years, what I've actually learned is that if I actually sit with it and ask myself why I'm angry, that kind of helps diffuse that and helps me like get clarity a lot more. So I have many of these, but I would say anger is one which I've really spent time working on, because it's very easy to let anger move you in directions where you shouldn't really move.
I agree. My journey with anger has been really different as well. I realized that I would get angry at the smallest things. And over the years, I've realized that I am giving the power to someone else or something else to rattle me so intensely to get that anger out of me, that I'm giving away my emotional power to someone else. Now it takes mountains to make me angry because I have taken that right back, that control back to my own selves. Only I can decide when I get angry and when I don't, who I get angry at, who I don't even want the person to see me angry because they don't deserve to see me angry, so to speak. But I think it was, in my case, it was all about taking the power back in my own hands because I realized that I had given the power to make me angry to everyone and everything. The slightest of moves could make me angry. And it is such an intense emotion that I wanted to take the power back in my own hands. I felt it was important.
And it's also an emotion which I feel in relationships it's something, if you actually hand that over, it can actually be one of the worst things you can do for yourself and
because
for the
it makes you
relationship.
so vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Because it can send you down a spiral, and at some point you realize that it's your anger driving you, and then
Yeah.
you flip in the other direction of saying, oh, I need to make up for this, and it just never ends. And so I agree with you. There is, like, anger is one of those emotions which we misunderstand, yet
Yeah.
I think we do understand. I think we just don't want to admit it.
We just don't want to admit it. So yeah, so now I only give the power to make me angry to only those people who are very actually close to me. You know, I want only those people to have the privilege to make Priya upset or make Priya angry. So it's a part of me being in love, I think. You know, the person that I love should be the only person who can drive me angry.
It's a tough question, but it's also it sounds pretty simple. Is that what does love stand for you?
What does love stand for me? As in, you want me to define love?
What is how do you define love?
I define love as a form of care. And I know it sounds very simple coming from a poet, but I think it's true. You know, I always say प्यार परवाह है. जब आप किसी चीज़ की परवाह करने लग जाओ, तब आप उससे प्यार करने लगते हो. And to me, it manifests itself in different aspects as well. And if you look at the circle of care, you will realize that everyone who loves you will care about you to a certain extent. Whether it is your children, whether it is your lover, whether it is your parents, whether it is your friends, the moment that aspect of care comes into place, the moment I know I start caring about someone, I know I'm in love. I know that that first stage, in my case, has begun. So for me, that to me encompasses what love is. Yeah.
Through all these years, have you had someone give you a piece of advice that stuck with you?
Yes. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever received is don't let anyone else tell your story. And it was said to me in passing by someone. And I was like, hey, yeah, that's right. And I realized that I was letting everyone else tell my story. I wasn't, again, in charge of my own story. And this was just before I had left Australia. So, yeah, that is one of the pieces of advice that has stuck by me over the years.
You know, I could kind of keep going on with this conversation because as it gets deeper, but we always have a thing, and at some point the audience is going to say, can you stop saying this at the end of every episode? Said, I also like to leave room for further conversations, part 2, part 3, however those parts are. But thank you so much for coming on the show. And I feel this is one of those conversations where I've thought as much about every single aspect of what you're saying while you're speaking. I've learned to be a better listener, but in this case, I was also trying to stop myself from marinating.
From overthinking.
Overthinking while we were doing this conversation. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a fun conversation, and it has flowed in such myriad directions that I think it's fun. It's like a stream of consciousness conversation, and I love it.
I think that's the best way to define it.
Agreed.